and welcome to today's DCHA Calf Chat, sponsored by Elanco Animal Health. My name is Ellen Cushing, and I am a feed additive manager for Elanco Animal Health residing in Eustisford, Wisconsin. In my role at Elanco, I work closely with farmers, calf ranches, and nutritionists throughout the U.S. I also serve as the vice president for the Dairy Calf and Heifer Board of Directors. Our speaker today is Dr. David Prentice. Dr. Prentice obtained his DVM at Iowa State University and spent the first 7 years of his career in a mixed private practice in Northeast Iowa, followed by exclusive dairy practice in Tulare, California. In the year 2000, he obtained his master's in dairy science from the University of Wisconsin, where he researched ionophores and subacute ruminal acidosis. Dr. Prentice has been in various industry positions since leaving practice and has been a technical consultant for Elanco Animal Health in the dairy business for almost 16 years. He and his family live in Northeast Iowa. If you have any questions throughout this presentation, please post them in the comments in the chat. All right, Dr. Prentice, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thanks. Welcome, everybody. And today's topic is flies and their control. And if you're anything like me, you hate flies. So this may be a little late for this year, but flies were a little bit later in appearing. At least they were around us. So if not for this year, it'll give you some ideas for next year, if nothing else. So today's agenda, just talk about several things. First of all, life cycle and other factors for flies. The fly species in this country that typically affect our livestock. So I'm not going to talk about other flies in other parts of the world. Some economics, and then we'll briefly touch on a few of the solutions that we have with our fly portfolio at Elanco Animal Health. So the life cycle, the reproductive life cycle is pretty standard for all of the flies that are affecting our operations, be it dairy or beef. Here is kind of a this outline walks you through the stage. The adults lay the eggs, then the eggs go into a first instar larva, second instar larva, third instar larva, and then pupa, which we would think of the cocoon as a butterfly. And then instead of a nice butterfly coming out, we get a nasty fly that comes out. And the generation or the cycle depends on a few things, temperature, humidity, etc. The big problem is we can get 10 to 30 generations per year, depending on the year. And then obviously, if we don't do a lot of control, we can get pretty explosive growth. So factors affecting fly infestations, what I said before, temperature and humidity, that's probably the biggest thing. The biggest thing that we can't control, let's put it that way. So we are right here. So this graph is basically for the US, and depending on which region of the country you are in, I am in the upper Midwest. So we're right here in July, August. We're kind of in our peak fly season. So obviously it's going to be 90 degrees today with relatively high humidities, and that's increasing here in the next couple days. And last week was hot and humid as well. So we've got ideal fly environment for the life cycle of the fly. So we've had also, at least where I'm at, I know it's not like this in all parts of the country, but Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, we've also had a lot of moisture. So we do have a lot of lush green grass and good places for them to rest as well. So the other thing that affects flies, and these are things that we can control to a degree. When I say water moisture, that would be water moisture, kind of standing water moisture, something that we can do through mitigation. So either through removal or changing the landscape a little bit. Same with organic material and same with vegetation. So these are things that we can control. We got low-lying areas that have a lot of water and vegetation around them. We need to keep that vegetation down. If it's puddling, areas that puddle, we can fill those, alter where that water sits. And then of course, organic material, we like to remove as much of that as we can. So there are some factors. Basically, these factors are what affect their reproductive cycle. So we can control some of it. Obviously, we can't control the weather. And fly populations are like icebergs. So the flies you see on the hood of your pickup or the flies that you see on your cattle are only 20% of the problem, because we use this 80-20% rule. And again, it's like an iceberg. 20% sticks out of the water. So that's the flies that we're actually seeing. And then we've got the army behind, or the reserves, and that would be the pupae, the larvae, and the eggs, of course. So we need to consider everything below the surface, if you will. This 80% is what we also need to consider when it comes to fly control. And the best fly control is a year-round effort, not just for so long. I know in my first practice, for so long, we would just spray, right? All we were really doing was getting the adults. And once the spray wears off or goes away, following week, boom, we got right back to the problem. So we're constantly chasing adults around the farm, so to speak, and never really getting this 80%, which was really the problem. So like I said at the beginning, I want to talk about the flies that are important to us and the ag industry in the United States, realizing that there are some other flies that are important to both human medicine and animals outside the U.S., but we're going to focus on the U.S. And we can narrow it down to 4. These are the big 4 that affect agriculture. So we got flies that are non-biting flies. So these would be flies that suck up their feed, spongy mouth parts, and that would be these 2 on the right, the face fly and the house fly. And we all know the house fly, that thing's everywhere. House fly, blowfly, they're in a very similar category. And then the biting flies are the horn fly and the stable fly. Now, there is one fly that is starting to be a problem in the U.S., not necessarily where I live, but obviously in Texas and New Mexico. And I'll touch on that if anybody has any questions about that. I'm not going to do a presentation per se, but obviously the new world screwworm is in the United States now. I checked it this morning. I think there's 35 cases, 20 of which are active. That is a fly. It's not the fly that's the problem. It's the larva. But that's such a small part of the United States that I'm really not going to cover it per se. But if anybody has any questions on it, I'll be happy to try to answer them. So again, the spongy, non-biting flies, face fly and house fly, and then the biting flies are the horn fly and the stable fly. And these would be the big economic drivers in the United States, with the exception of the screwworm that's possibly starting and maybe get worse. I'm not going to talk a lot about the horn fly, but I do want to mention it because it is the number 1 from an economics standpoint. And the reason I'm not going to talk about it very much is because it's not a big problem on a lot of our dairies, at least our large confinement dairies. Anybody that's got pasture cattle or organic dairies where their cattle are out on grass, then this will be important. But most of our confined dairies, it's not an issue with. So the horn fly, they are blood-sucking flies. They feed a lot. They feed 20 to 40 times a day, and they're obligate parasites of the host, meaning that they live their life on the host. They literally only fly off the cow or the bull. They fly off the bovine to lay their eggs, and that's about it. Everything else is done on the animal. They are in a head down orientation, so they're looking towards the ground when you see them, and they take quite a few blood meals, and their bite's pretty painful. And this is the classic. When you see the animals in the pasture and you get that black cloud, and then it kind of comes back down. So when they throw their head back, the black cloud comes up and then it comes back down. The horn fly, only the main reason it's not a big deal with our confinement dairies, or at least our confinement dairies that are not next to large beef operations, is they only lay eggs they need a fresh fecal pile. They need a fresh pile of manure to lay their eggs. And yes, that happens on dairies. We get fresh piles of manure, even on a dry lot dairy, we'll get a fresh pile of manure, but it gets trampled and or dried out and harrowed relatively quickly, compared to pasture where they can sit a long time undisturbed. So on most of our dairies, we don't have a lot of fresh piles that are undisturbed. So this is not typically a dairy fly as opposed to a pasture fly. It's definitely a pasture fly. So it can be dairy, but not confined dairies. So the other one that's more of a nuisance to our beef animals versus the dairy is the face fly. It doesn't spend, unlike the horn fly, it's spongy mouth parts, it's non-biting, but it feeds on tears and lacrimal secretions, spends most of its time off the animal in the grass, so it's not on the animal all the time. So, you know, what you see is not what you get. Like the horn fly, what you see is what you get, but the face fly, they're not, you know, it's just a representative of the population bothering the animal. And like the horn fly, they also require a fresh, undisturbed manure patty or manure pile. So again, not extremely prevalent on dairies, but they are there, just not in the numbers that we see in our mama cow operations. And then, of course, everybody knows the face fly for this. It's a contributing factor for spreading Moraxella bovis, potentially Moraxella bovaculi, which are the causative organisms in the pink eye complex. And anybody that's ever had pink eye, our human pink eye is a little bit different than animal pink eye, but it's very painful, and I'm sure it's very painful for our bovine friends. Stable fly, this is my nemesis. This is the one that I believe is the biggest problem on our dairy operations. It is also a biting fly like the horn fly, but instead of a face down towards the ground, it is face up towards the sky, and it also tends to be on lower proximities, as this picture shows. So this would be the, you know, they tend to be on the hock and in the lower proximities of the leg. And again, what you see is not what you get, because they don't spend all of their time on the animal. They actually spend very little time on the animal. They come and take a blood meal, and then they go to their resting area or where they want to lay their eggs, their reproductive areas. And as I said, they spend a lot of time away from the animal. If you're on a dairy operation and you happen to, on a confined dairy operation, and happen to smack a fly on your arm and you get a nice blood spot, it's not a house fly, it is a stable fly. So stable flies feed on blood. That's what they need to reproduce. And then they'll take their blood meal, and they need several blood meals, enough to get engorged like this where they have enough blood. And once that happens, their reproductive cycle can continue. They will then lay their eggs, and you'll get the next crop of stable flies. And as this picture shows, this is part of the problem with stable flies. This is why they're so hard to treat, because they're not here very long, right? They're here most of the time. So they're off the animal most of the time. So we need to find those areas in the premise and their reproductive areas to treat. And that's what we really need to focus on. So the habitat and life cycle for the stable fly. I know this is a beef picture, but this is a classic one. Our poor beef animals, they get all four. Probably the least bothersome for the beef animal is the house fly, but for our dairy cows, they get mainly the stable fly and the house fly. But our beef counterparts get all of them. But if you've got these in your dry cow area, these feeding rings are notorious because you get moisture around it. You get all this hay that will collect moisture and manure and becomes moist, and then it's rotting organic material, and that is the absolute perfect environment for stable fly reproduction. And that is also why our dairies and our calf ranches have a lot of stable flies, because yes, you may say, I don't ever feed cows with this ring like that. That's old technology. Get that, don't do it. But my guess is you have silage, used bedding, piles of grass clippings, or refusal feed, and probably somewhere on your dairy you have fermenting feed that's not being consumed and it's just laying there. And if you don't have any of these, then you probably don't have a very big fly problem. The house fly is more of just a nuisance fly. It is probably more bothersome from an economic standpoint. It's probably more bothersome to humans than it is cattle, although we can get bunching of cattle from the house flies, and just, the total mass of flies. It's probably the biggest deal with cattle is probably the spread of disease. That's probably the biggest factor for cattle. They have houseflies have been known to spread Staph aureus, for example, and infect heifers. But they kind of, they're called the filth fly, so they just kind of like everything, right? They don't care if it's manure or rotten food or your sandwich that you left on the desk or whatever. They are just going to kind of go everywhere and look for a place to lay eggs and look for a place to vomit and feed. So they're not really obligated to livestock, but obviously farms have a lot of the environment that they like. So we tend to find them a lot on farms. And this would be a fly that's, kind of all of our species, not just cattle, and even for humans too, obviously. Restaurants and that stuff, they're also a pain. And like I said, disease transmission is the big one. You see these things on your wall and your window, and I know this is a small picture, but if you look at the stanchion here, all those black spots, that's basically fly vomit. This next picture to the right is a scanning electron micrograph of the spongy mouth parts of a fly. So the red arrow, so you take the mouth parts, you do a scanning electron microscope. If you've got good eyes, you can see all these rod-shaped things down in here that look like little hot dogs. Those are actually E. coli bacteria in that scanning electron micrograph. So just loaded with E. coli, and as you know, E. coli has lots of ramifications in animals and humans. And this again is over here to the right. This is a typical, the blowfly. This is kind of in the same family of a housefly. It's just got this nice, brilliant green color, but they're, you can view it as a housefly. You don't see them in numbers as much as the regular housefly, but again, it's the same type biology. And this is an electron micrograph of its digestive tract, and again, lots of E. coli within these flies. And this is basically just a vomiting, crapping machine, right? So it feeds, vomits, feeds, craps, feeds, vomits. Sorry for those of you that are eating lunch, but that's basically what it does. So comparison between flies, this is kind of a one-page summary. And this I really could have just started with this slide without the pictures, because this is kind of where the rubber meets the road. So the four flies that affect our livestock, where they breed. So again, if you look at the horn flies and face flies, they're obligate manure, fresh manure. That's why we don't see a lot of them on confined dairies. They are definitely a beef cattle, pasture cattle nuisance. But then stable flies and house flies affect us more on the dairy side of things, the confined dairy, because they'll lay their eggs pretty much anywhere. Stable flies do like rotting, decaying organic matter. And then blood feeders are the stable and the horn, and then house flies and face flies feed by sucking. Face flies are pretty obligate to saliva and lacrimal and nasal secretions, whereas house flies will feed on lots of things. And then irritation for stable flies, the big thing is their bite, and that's part of the problem with stable fly on the dairy. So the economics, where the rubber meets the road, or how much they're going to cost us. So I've got just a few things in here on hornfly because it is the biggiest part. I mean, it's the lion's share from the total U.S. economic loss. followed by the stable fly. But this would be a terrible situation to see. Just some real quick estimates. There's about 4,000 flies on each side. And the rule of thumb is that if you take your palm of your hand, and it's about this density, it's about 200 flies in the surface area of the palm of your hand. So just a scientific wild ass guess, be about 8,000 flies total, 4,000 on each side. Each fly eats approximately 0.01 ml of blood, so it doesn't sound like a lot, and it's really not when you think about it. You know, you'd need a tuberculin syringe to see that amount, which is very, very tiny. But when you got that many flies feeding 20 to 40 times, so we're going to say 30 times, you're talking about 240,000 bites a day. Now you do the math, and you're talking about 2.4 liters of blood per day, and that's over 4 times a donation that if you go donate, which you're only allowed to donate, every 6 weeks. So that would be like doing 4 donations, and I realize it's a bigger beast than us. That's like 4 blood donations a day. So it can be significant and a significant draw on that animal to replace that blood. So you're talking about an energetics and a loss that way, efficiency loss. So here is just kind of put this in perspective. Those of you that have gone fishing in the summertime and you're in your boat, you get this nasty fly that hurts like where you're sitting on your front porch trying to enjoy a bourbon. And you get a bite on your ankle. It's usually a fly. And just to put all these in perspective, a mosquito bite, relative diameter is about. Look at the red circles there. That'll kind of compare it. So that would be a mosquito. It's probably the least painful bite. The sheephead, which is a wingless fly, often mistaken for a tick, quite a bit bigger, a little bit more pain. The tsetse fly, which is the nemesis of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, very, very painful. We don't have them here, thank goodness. But then we have the horn fly, which is, again, very painful to the cattle, and that's why they're constantly throwing their head and wiping their tail and trying to get rid of those things because they're a pain. And then, of course, our good friend, the stable fly, which has a very big diameter bite and is extremely painful. And those of you who are trying to enjoy your bourbon on the front porch or fishing the boat, you know these because they hurt like hell and they drive you crazy. And you try to get rid of them. So, and now imagine day after day, constant on our cattle. And that's part of the problem with stable flies. The constant energy and swishing the table, stomping of the legs, all of that takes energy, irritation, time that the animal's not eating or resting. It's spending time trying to get rid of these stupid flies. And yes, it's small amounts, but it's small amounts over a large number of cattle over many days, depending on where you're located. So it ends up being a lot, it's small amounts per cow per day, but it all adds up, and then you're talking about quite a bit more losses. And in the U.S., it's estimated to be about 2.2 billion loss of stable flies, most of which is coming from dairy operations. Not all of it. Some of that will be feedlot as well, but mostly dairy. House flies, again, number one nuisance fly, and I would say that's the big thing with it. And every human seems to have its own tolerance of flies. I've been on operations where flies are buzzing around and people don't seem to care. It's not that big a deal. In my house, if we have one fly, we're chasing it or getting the Ajita out. One fly, because we can't stand them, and I'm not as aggressive with a box elder bug or an Asian beetle, but when we see a fly, that thing's getting chased, just because we hate them. Management methods, again, this slide again, because I think this is the most important. Clean, clean, clean. The more you can remove. Again, we cannot control the weather, or at least we haven't figured it out yet, but we can control these things. We can kind of, to a degree, we can control where rotting organic matter is, vegetation, leftover feed. You know, this area here, I don't know if you're seeing my cursor, but imagine this is a dairy stanchion. If we had a dairy stanchion along here and headlocks, you got that little gap between the bottom and the support bracket. And a lot of times TMR will get stuck in there, and that is an ideal place for rotting TMR, and TMR is loaded with goodies for stable flies. So they will lay their eggs in there. So once a week, you should knock that out. And if it's too much labor, if you don't have the people to knock it out and clean it, then you should treat it. But ideally, it would be best to remove it. So the more of this you remove, you know, now we're working on that 80%. The more we attack the 80%, the less we have to worry about the 20%. So again, these are the areas that you want to target. Decaying bedding. If you think about if you've got calves on your operation, or if you're a calf raiser and you got lines of calf hutches, the calf does a pretty good job of tromping that down inside. But on the perimeter of that calf hutch, where the urine comes and it rains, and if you bed with, you know, straw or hay, or mostly straw or some sort of organic matter, that gets some moisture in it. If you're in western Kansas on a day like today, probably not a problem. If you're in Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, high humidity, it's not going to dry out. It's going to have moisture. We've got temperature. It's going to rot. It's going to ferment, and this is going to be stable fly heaven. Same with what I called old technology before, the feed rings here. Not old technology for the beef world, and still a problem in beef operations for stable flies. Again, anywhere where there's decaying manure with organic matter is an absolutely haven for flies, house flies, and stable flies. And you know, this is what we don't want to see. So these are all the cocoons, so to speak, and these are not going to be monarch butterflies, right? These are going to be stable flies or house flies. And the more we can disturb that manure on a confined area, it's not a big problem. But in pasture situations, if you've got pastured cattle, I would absolutely recommend a feed through, depending on if it's, you know, if you're targeting the horn fly or well, either way, horn fly and face fly, I would definitely recommend some sort of feed through products. All right, so that's kind of a wrap up on the nemesis and the pests. So now let's talk about the artillery to kill them. This would be I'm obviously going to focus on products that we have and that we sell. Mind you, there's a plethora of products, and I don't know the comparisons on all of them. I know a lot more about ours, obviously, so I'll focus on those. And we talk about integrated pest management, and what that means is right product, right time, with rotation. And we have what I call bug Bibles or bug guides that kind of lay this out in a poster format, and ours are color-coded, because all of these different colors means it's a different chemical class, and then we divide things into adulticides and larvicides. So we've got pyrethroids, neonicotinoids, organophosphates, and spinosids or spinosins, which are available for our adults. Pretty much the same for the larvicides, except for the neonicotinoids. We don't have any of those for larvicides, but then we have some insect growth regulators. And in my simplistic view, I look at this picture and I think this right over here, the right side of this picture, is your 80% problem, and the left is your 20% problem. So here's where you should spend, in my opinion, most of your time is over here on the larvicides, and start with the insect growth regulators. Our product is Neparex. This is a product that you get into anywhere where it's very difficult to remove organic matter, or you simply don't have the labor to do it. And, you know, maybe around like I said, around the perimeter of the calf hutch. It's easy to do between the calves, but it's kind of a pain to do during the time that the calf is there. So it may be easier just to spray those, and then when the calf is gone, then you remove it. So Neparex is an insect growth regulator. It affects the development of that larva, so a fly will not hatch out from the cocoon, so to speak. It kills them before they ever become flies. Elector it plays in both arenas, both as an adulticide and as a larvicide. It's not an insect growth regulator per se. It will affect the larva. So you kind of have to have it on board before they get to that cocoon stage. But again, this would be a premise area, and you can actually rotate this with Elector. So if you've used Elector the last couple of years, you might want to try rotating it with Neparex, for example. So this is good rotation with Neparex because you're using two different chemical classes. Pyrethroids, we got a lot of different pyrethroids. Pyrethroids are not necessarily larvicides. They're more for animal and the adult control. We've got ear tags, which again, most dairies don't do, but then we've got, permectin CDS. Permectin 2 I use a lot of. That would kind of be my go-to spray for lower proximity, the lower legs, if I'm dealing with a big stable fly issue. Silence Poron. Catron is a wound spray. For those of you that are in Texas, New Mexico, anytime you do dehorning, castration, whatever, it might be a good idea to spray with Catron because this product is labeled for New World screwworm. And the New World screwworm fly likes fresh wounds, and even a wound the size of a tick bite or a stable fly, most likely. A wound from one of those animals can draw a New World screwworm. Doesn't affect most of us, but in Texas, New Mexico, if you're doing that, I'd probably spray any type of wounds, castration, dehorning, ear tagging, etc. Just give it a shot at Catron. Organophosphates, these kind of come with some baggage. I know organophosphates are obviously human toxicity, but most of these, I just recommend following the label on them, using them according to the directions with the personal protective equipment. A couple of them you do need applicators licenses because they come in a very concentrated form, and that would be Aravap and Vapona. And these would be premise sprays predominantly, and then obviously ear tags, some dusts. We do have a feed through, organophosphate feed through, but again, that would probably be more for your pasture situations. Our neonicotinoids, these would be our fly bait products. A big difference, we have two of them. One is quick bait and one is Agita. Agita is a newer product. It has less resistance built up, but it also is a quick kill product. When I said I would spray it, I have this stuff that I actually thought I had a bottle of it sitting on my desk. I don't. I must have taken away. I keep 4-ounce bottles of this stuff around. I mix it up. I weigh it out on a little scale, and I have it powder ready to go. And if I see a fly, I will mix some of that up and go get it. Because this is a quick kill product as well, so you get the thrill of the kill. It is newer than quick bait. Both of these are good products, but I guess I'm leaning more towards Agita than quick bait. The spinosad product, Elector, will also kill adult flies, but it's not a quick kill. We actually used to have a bait with it, and I loved it, but it didn't do real good because people didn't think it killed because they never saw flies there. But what happens is the fly feeds on it and then flies to your neighbors and dies, or flies somewhere else and dies. So spinosad or Elector spray, premise spray will kill house flies and adult flies. It just won't kill them there, and it's not a quick kill. So that's another product you can rotate in and out. So habits and behavior, control the options. So again, know what fly you're targeting. know what animal you're targeting, what is the environmental situation, how much of it can you clean, how much of it can you remove, and then timing. You got to get your insect growth regulators in early, get your larvicides in early. Like I said, we're kind of too late for that right now. We're kind of past the punch. Not saying that I wouldn't do it, but realize that, if you're any of these situations that you see here, other than maybe this top right, because I can't see a lot of flies on the top right picture, but certainly anything down here in the lower left hand, we've kind of, for every one of these flies we see, there's another 4 or 5 that we don't see. So all of these are messy situations, and we're kind of behind the 8 ball already. So you might need to get more aggressive with premise type spraying and dusting for these situations versus just an insect growth regulator. But next year, get your insect growth regulators in early and start tackling that below the water problem. So again, target control points. We talked about a lot of these. Wherever there's the rotting organic matter. This picture on the bottom, you can kind of see it below this bar. There's no feed in here, so that's good. That's what I like to see. And then, where does the pest live and where does the pest reproduce? So right products, right animals, right time. That's what we're after. And don't ever, again, I talk about me, where the one fly in my house, I go get it. That's not real world on agriculture situations. In a dairy or beef operation, we're never going to get all the flies, right? So don't try chasing all the flies. If you can get the majority and knock it down to where our animals are not having the economic loss, realize that it's not going to be 100%. You're not going to get them all. But trying to get to that economic threshold is what we're doing. And then remember to rotate, work with rotation, because if you use the same product time over time, we can build resistance to these products. So that was what I had for today. And like I said, I didn't talk a lot about screwworm. It's not a huge deal here in the upper Midwest where I live. But if anybody has questions on that, I'll try to answer them, because it is in the United States now. But any other questions, I will certainly try to answer them if I can.
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions here coming into the chat. One that just popped in is, what is your opinion on biological fly controls such as parasitic wasps?
Oh, great question. So I'm gonna go hypothetical and I'm gonna go real world. Hypothetical, I think they're cool as heck. I think the biology is awesome. I mean, using an insect to kill another insect, that's top notch, right? That's Star Wars stuff. I think the problem is they are expensive. To the best of my knowledge, now I will also admit I have not looked for at least a year, but a year ago when I was doing a lot more fly presentations for CE credit and whatnot, I did a literature review trying to find literature on those things. There's not a lot in the peer-reviewed literature. But I think it makes biologic sense. I think it's a cool approach to do it. But I think probably the mistakes are people don't buy enough and don't put them in enough. So I think if you use them a lot, I think it will reduce the numbers significantly. But you do have to pay attention to some of the other products that you use, because you also can kill those with some of the, if you get your Vapona out and go spray your barn, you're probably going to kill all your parasiticide wasps, which is less than ideal. So I think the biology's cool. I'm not sure I can provide ample peer-reviewed, scientific, without a doubt proof that they significantly reduce numbers. But I think that's probably mostly due to human error versus the biology. Does that make sense? Did I answer the question, whoever answered it or asked it?
I think it makes sense. We'll see if that person puts another comment in, but I've seen it used on quite a few farms, but I do agree with you that I think you need to kind of check what the other sprays are that you're using, because I've also seen where farms have accidentally killed the wasps.
Yeah, and I think you need to continually add to the population, right? Because they are going to fly off, they are going to die. So it's not a one and done. It's not a one and done situation, right? You need to keep like anything. You need to keep after it. But again, I think the biology is cool.
Yeah, I agree. Another question we have is, how often do you need to change out active ingredients? Do you recommend switching out every year, multiple times during the season, or what do you think works best?
I would absolutely do a year for it, kind of at the minimum. Probably with my insect growth regulators, I have no issue going with those a year. So let's say I buy a tub of Neparex, I'm going to use Neparex for the year. And again, I'm kind of biased to the Upper Midwest, right? Our fly season is 5 months. So I've bought that product. That's going to be my go-to product for this year. And I will say with Neparex, for those of you that have not used Neparex, on the label it says you can either dry apply or wet apply. 99% of the time I'm going to wet apply because you get better penetration. If you've got enough moisture in an area where you can pick up something and literally squeeze water out without much pressure, then you can probably dry apply because there's going to be enough to go into solution. But I personally like to mix it up and then spray it. That's kind of how I prefer to do it. And I think on your insect growth regulators, certainly a year is not an issue. Maybe on some of your premise sprays, maybe within a given fly season, I may switch between a organophosphate and a pyrethroid, or a spinosad and a pyrethroid, or something like that. Obviously, we have way more pyrethroids on the market than anything else, right? They're kind of all over. So that's usually in my yearly rotation. But I probably wouldn't use something all year and then have that as my go-to for the next year. I'd probably rotate it out.
I go to a lot of farms where they use bait as their main, like on a calf ranch, as their main way of getting rid of flies. Can you speak a little bit to the different mouth parts on flies and where bait works versus where it doesn't?
Yeah. So again, think of that slide that I showed with the kind of the summary of our flies, right? And I'll go back to it here. Our biting flies are the stable fly and horn fly. It's farther back than I thought. Our biting flies are these guys, the horn flies and the horn flies and stable flies. Baits are not going to work for those two flies, right? So baits, like let's take Agita. So Agita has an attractant in it. So I've got that fly flying around in my kitchen. I'm going to spray a little bit of Agita on a piece of tin foil and put it on my kitchen table. That fly eventually will come. If I was really smart, I'd get some yellow tin foil because house flies are attracted to yellow, but I don't have yellow. But you spray Agita on that tin foil, eventually that fly is going to find its way to that tin foil, and it has an attractant in it. And that fly is going to feed on that material, and then it's going to tip over dead, right? It's going to die pretty quickly, probably right there on my tinfoil. Baits work by attractants and the chemical in them. So both Quick Bait and Agita are both quick kill products. Spinosad, Elector, it does not have an attractant on it, but if you spray that surface area and then those flies land on that surface area and then they go to vomit or there's something there that they want to feed on, they're absorbing the chemical and then they'll get it that way. Does not work for stable flies, does not work for horn flies, because you either have to get it on the pest itself or you have to get it through the egg and larva. So baits are not good for horn flies and stable flies, and traps are also not the best for them because they're blood feeders. The horn fly is always on the animal, so it's not even going to go to the trap. The stable fly, the nice thing about stable fly is try to find where it rests. So it rests in shady areas, tall grass. Keep your tall grass mowed down. If you find if you're out on your farm and you have a shady side of a silo or something, do people still have silos? I think they do. If you have a shady side of a building or something, and you see a bunch of flies there in the afternoon shade, then that would be a place where I would spray a premise spray. If you keep seeing those flies there, early morning and late afternoon is also a time that you can, if there's a bunch of flies resting there, if those happen to be stable flies, you spray that area, that spray actually gets on the fly and it kills the fly. But again, you're attacking 20% of the population. Also with stable flies, a lot of our dairies, if you're spraying the chemical on the back, that works great for lice and ticks and some products for mange. It doesn't really work good for the stable fly because the stable fly is feeding low. It's down on the lower extremities. So you have to spray low.
Yeah, thank you for that, because we see that a lot, or because there's so many products that are on the market, and sometimes it's hard to keep them straight for which ones they work the best for. So it's kind of putting together.
Yeah. So again, it's finding what pest is ailing you, and then trying to attack that pest where, like I say, I would spend 80% of my efforts on the reproductive areas, and then 20% of my effort. In an ideal world, you would never have to buy Vapona and spray the premise. You would never have to have the premise completely sprayed. But that's an ideal world. That means you knock that 80% so much that you don't have to, fog the environment, so to speak.
Yeah, and you've touched on this a lot, but really step one, clean up your environment so you can spray less, not have to purchase as much product, and overall it'll take you less time as you go throughout the season. And then step two really is you want us to concentrate on that 80%, so maybe the larvicide, so that way our adult fly population doesn't grow to too high of a peak.
Yep. Yeah, in real world example, I was doing a fly audit on a California dairy, and we walked around and, we found a lot of areas that were pretty easy to clean up that needed to be cleaned. But then there's areas, and let's be honest, that it's a miserable job. Nobody wants to do it. On that particular dairy, it was their crossovers, right? And obviously they got enough moisture, and on the edge there's a ton of organic matter. But in order to clean that, you had to lift the grate out, go in with a shovel. I couldn't imagine doing that every 2 weeks, right? So you simply just spray it. That's a good place for Nephlorex. The opposite of that is where you push feed. A lot of dairies will have a concrete wall where the skid or the front end loader can come up and catch the feed. Well, there's always that feed that drops over the back, right? As the bucket comes up, feed drops over the back, and you get this organic matter back here. Well, once a week, just take a shovel and scrape that out. Doesn't have to be daily. Once a week, once every 10 days for the 5 months a year, right? And if you don't have labor, if you're short on labor, if you can't do it, you just spray it every 30 days with Nephlorex.
So we've got time for about one more question. This person asks, if you are using a fly control product, can you mix multiple fly control products together to make it stronger, or what do you recommend?
When you do that, you're an organic chemist experiment. I'm not gonna answer that because I don't know. You probably can, but I would not recommend it unless it's proven in the literature or a manufacturer or something says that you can, because you may, remember, all these things are active ingredients with inactive ingredients, right? So they have active ingredients and inactive ingredients. Now, some of them you can mix with mineral oil and that stuff to work in foggers or back rubbers and that kind of stuff, but that'll be clearly on the label. But if you take, for example, let's take a Lector and mix it with a pyrethroid, you're talking two different chemicals, two different active ingredients, and I have no idea what the chemistry is as far as, is it going to make it synergistic? Is it going to make it better? Or is it going to make it worse? Or are you going to get some sort of reaction? And then you also have the carriers within those compounds, because when you buy a jug of something, there's chemical active ingredient and carrier ingredient. So you're literally doing your own experimentation, and I would not do it. I would much rather spray an animal or treat an animal today with product X and then come back 2 weeks later and do it with Y versus mixing X and Y. So.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Again, I think sometimes what happens is we get to the middle of the year, so we get to like this July time frame, and there's like this explosion of flies, and all of a sudden people are just freaking out because it's like now they've got all these flies and they want to throw anything at it that they can. Versus if you can take a step back, and granted, right now we are in July, but maybe for next year, planning now for next year when you're going to start your larvicide, what you can clean up now to help minimize the flies for next season, and then start that larvicide and just have a more planned approach.
Absolutely. And in fact, now at this point in time, if you are going to use a larvicide, you probably do need to be really aggressive on, trying to knock down your adult population first. So maybe, fog the area and then put the larvicide in the same day. So you're kind of going after a two-prong approach, versus in, April, you don't need to do any fogging, obviously, because there's no flies, but fog at a time when flies are there, or find where the house flies are a little bit easier, because usually that's in the, a lot of times that's in the human facilities and around cats. You see a lot of cat hutches just swimming with house flies. And as far as that goes, on calf hutches, for those of you that have calf hutches, with Agita goes a very long way, right? Agita goes a long way. So you don't have to spray that entire hutch. I take a sheet of paper and I only spray an area like that on the left side of the hutch, that on the right side of the hutch. And then if you have buckets in front, spray just a little bit on the bucket, and that's it. You don't have to, a little bit of Agita goes a long way for house flies. So, it's not like you need to cover the whole area with like you would for a stable fly area.
Yeah, I think that's really good, because I do think we get to a point in the season where we're over flies. The humans don't like them, the animals don't like them, and then we start to kind of go kamikaze spraying on everything. But
I kamikaze spray with Agita. I do. Guilty.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate all the questions today. Thank you so much, Dr. Prentice. I think this was a great presentation. And even though we are halfway through this fly season, I think it's very timely to start prepping for next fly season and even to close out this year. So thank you guys so much for joining, and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you all. Take care.